Well, Pokémon Legends Arceus has arrived as the first big first-party potential blockbuster of 2022, and Game Freak and the Pokémon franchise have been in a rut, and fans have been calling for a shake-up in terms of mechanics, and Pokémon Legends Arceus is a step in the right direction. And when it was first announced, we wanted to hail it as Pokémon Breath of the Wild. However, it turned out much more like Pokémon Monster Hunter. However, there are some real improvements here, and they do have me really optimistic for the future of the Pokémon franchise once again. Well, Pokémon is one of the most successful entertainment franchises out there in the world right now. You know, the Pokémon company literally prints money off the back of the Pokémon game, such as Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. We've had Sword and Shield recently, and also the ever-present Pokémon Go. You know, these recent entries haven't quite been able to live up to the success of the early games, and that's led to plenty of remakes, including Pokémon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, and also, as I mentioned before, the very recent Diamond and Pearl remakes. Well, Game Freak finally announced that they were deviating from the familiar formula with Pokémon Legends Arceus, and this one was going to iterate on the wild areas seen in Sword and Shield, and finally we'd see Pokémon out there in the wild as we've wanted for years. Well, Pokémon Legends Arceus sits in a strange place. It's not a mainline Pokémon entry. This is its own side quest of a game, much like the Let's Go series, so it does feel like an experiment that, if successful, features of the game could be worked into the main series. And having spent tens of hours with the game, I really hope they bring a lot of elements from Arceus, because this is the most fun I've had with Pokémon for years and years. Well, Pokémon Legends Arceus is set in the Hisui region, which is supposed to be a long time ago, and it's similar to a feudal Japan version of the Sinnoh region that we visit in Diamond and Pearl, so there's definitely some familiarity with the landscape. This is a time before humans and Pokémon live side by side, and they still live out there in the wild regions, and you got wooden Pokémon balls. They've only just been invented. The structure of the game is quite interesting. So we've got the main hub town called Jubilife Village. This is where we start out, having dropped through seemingly a time portal in the sky to arrive in the Hisui region. Jubilife Village is where the Monster Hunter comparison comes from, as we use this as our base and go out each day to scout out, hunt and study Pokemon. So it's not like Breath of the Wild, where we can simply walk into something that we see in the distance from Jubilife Village. It's much more contained into zones where we have to load in between each one. There's a sense of Breath of the Wild freedom once we get to one of our open destinations, but it's not quite the open world Pokemon adventure that we may have wanted after seeing the first trailer. Well, in terms of the story, you sign up to be part of the Galaxy team, and these are recent arrivals in this land where existing Diamond and Pearl clans argue over differing versions of their gods. And strange lightning has come out of the sky and shocked their noble Pokemon, causing untold damage, and it's up to us to find out what happened to the noble Pokemon, all the while studying and recording details of all the Pokemon in the region in the Hisui's first Pokedex. Well, our Pokedex here is a book, and we have to study, catch and carry out multiple tasks per Pokemon to learn all about them, and there's plenty of inspirations from Pokemon Go here in the observation techniques, which is a nice touch and a decent departure from the long-standing mechanics that we've been playing over and over for 20 years. Each Pokemon has a long list of research tasks. For example, you have to catch them a certain amount of times, battle them to observe moves, and also defeat them in battle. There's a variety of ways to catch the Pokemon, by sneaking up on them without them seeing you and hitting them on the back with a Pokeball, and that caused them to be confused. And there's a decent variety to the quests, which offers up some good variation in the gameplay. So this is where the gameplay loop starts to form. So rather than starting out in a town, heading up the road and battling Pokemon along the way through random battles and working your way through a list of gym leaders, here there's no gym leaders or random encounters. It's all very refreshing. So in Pokemon Legends Arceus, we see Pokemon out there in the wild, and it's great to see their relative size compared to you and also your Pokemon. So a Slowpoke, for example, is huge, whereas Pikachu is really small. So as you make your way through the Hisui region, you're going to collect research points by filling out your task list in the Pokedex. And research points, they're like XP, and they lead to leveling up and gaining star ranks in the Survey Corps. So rank up your stars and complete the main story quests, and areas are going to open up with newer, higher level Pokemon. And the gameplay loop doesn't sound very enticing on paper, but once you get stuck into it, it's definitely the most satisfying and addicting Pokemon experience that I've had for many years. I found Sword and Shield plus Diamond and Pearl a little bit of a slog at times, but here I'm quite happy to spend hours and hours researching and definitely catching those Pokemon. Arceus has plenty of personality, so the idle animations of the Pokemon, they're fantastic, and it definitely breathes life into them. You got the audio cues and the little sounds that you hear when you're out there in the wild, the patter of rain, the little burst of fireworks when you successfully catch a Pokemon. It feels like Game Freak has injected new life into the franchise with all of these little touches. I can't really point to a single thing, but there's loads of little things which all add up to a better gameplay experience. So Pokemon has always been about catching, but Pokémon Legends Arceus adds a little something extra here too. For example, you can walk or sneak up on your Pokemon and throw rudimentary wooden Pokeballs at them to catch them. So then there's a little wait, and then they either burst out of the trap or get caught. And often you have to sneak around because some Pokemon have the need to run away. So I spent hours trying to catch an Eevee, which is a rare spawn early on in the game, only for her to run away a few times, which is very, very frustrating. Although saying that, it did motivate me to come back, and I did eventually catch my Eevee. Well, catching the Pokemon has definitely been reinvigorated, and to accompany this, there's a decent crafting set of mechanics too. So crafting has had its place in the previous Pokemon entries, although here it's much more front and centre. So for example, you've got a crafting bench in the main town, plus you've got a little mobile crafting unit that you can take out on your excursions. The landscape is full of crafting materials such as berries in the tree, healing plants on the ground, and you can combine these together to make potions and revives for your Pokemon that help them out in the battle. And one neat feature here is you can throw Pokemon against a tree, and it's going to remove all the berries in one go. Well, the battle system has been given an overhaul too, so it is still turn-based, but there's loads of quality of life improvements here. For example, you can move around when you're battling. That shouldn't be underestimated how much this improves battles. So effects from fire, ice and paralysis tend to be shorter and easier to recover from, plus you've got the new agile and strong style moves. So for example, the strong style will increase the attack damage, but you're going to be slower, and the agile moves may be faster, but you're going to inflict less damage. The battle system is probably the area of the game most similar to other Pokemon games, and unfortunately not in a good way. So the turn-based nature of battle can sometimes feel a little bit random. For example, the Pokemon you're fighting might have 2 turns in a row, and there's little to explain why. You could argue that Game Freak wants to not veer too far away from the main Pokemon formula, but when you've experimented in so many other areas, why not try it here too in the battle system? We got Alpha Pokemon and the mini-boss encounters which switch things up in the battles and offer plenty of challenge. You're going to be out there roaming out there in the wild, and you'll come across a very large Pokemon with glowing red eyes, indicating it's an Alpha. So quite often these are multiple levels above you and could quite literally hand you a beatdown. And then you've got the noble Pokemon boss battles too. They're really, really fun, and they're huge, godlike Pokemon. They're revered by the people of the island, and they're enraged, and we have to throw their food at them in the form of calming balms. Well, the name sounds a bit silly, and the concept is pretty weird, plus the controls aren't great either. So you have to throw food at the noble Pokemon until you can throw out a Pokemon to whittle down their health to 0 without losing your Pokemon or blacking out from the fight. Now, it's kind of mechanics soup and doesn't really manage to pull itself together in a coherent way at all. But saying that, there is plenty to like here in Pokémon Legends Arceus. I love the exploration, the crafting, and collecting Pokemon. All that feels great. The performance does let the game down, so if you've been following the conversation, then you're going to recognise the discontent from the graphics, and I heard the game described as a GameCube port to the Nintendo Switch. And it does beg the question why Game Freak, who owns the largest entertainment franchise in the world, why they can't manage to have up-to-date graphics in their games. So The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, a 5-year-old game at this point, looks much, much better. The characters and the Pokemon don't look too bad at all. It's the environments that really let the game down. Textures and scenery pop in all too often, and the grass, for example, looks absolutely terrible. It does make you wonder why Legends Arceus is in the state that it's in. It may be down to the fact that Game Freak sells hundreds of millions of copies of the game, and they don't really need to polish it. They just know they're going to get sales. However, if they did, it would take the game from being an average game to being a really, really great game. With the right graphics and performance, which could easily be attained on Nintendo Switch, this could have been one of the best games of the year for sure. So there's enough innovation here, it could have been a great Pokemon entry. Unfortunately, it's totally let down by the performance. I do understand it was developed in only a few years, but if that's the case, slow down a bit and take your time. We literally just got some remakes late last year in November or December, and it always seemed that the release of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl was going to be too close to this release. With that said, I've enjoyed my time with Pokémon Legends Arceus, and I will be going back to it again. The story is a little weak, and the sheer amount of dialogue at the start of the game is funny. There's just way too much and no voicing acting in the game, and it does feel like you're just waiting and waiting and reading. But it's the gameplay, the exploration, catching Pokemon, actually seeing your Pokemon out there in the wild for the first time, relatively sized against one another. It is really, really good. So if you're a fan of the franchise, I definitely recommend picking this one up. And it really does give me hope for the future of the franchise. And it's going to be really interesting to see where we go from here and which elements from Pokémon Legends Arceus Game Freak decides to keep in future releases. Well, the game was developed by Game Freak, it was published by Nintendo and the Pokémon Company, it's released for Nintendo Switch, and it originally came out on the 28th of January 2022. Well, that is it for my review of Pokémon Legends Arceus. Definitely a little bit of a mixed bag, but as I said, it's the most fun I've had with a Pokémon game in years. Recently played through the Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl remakes, and to be honest, about halfway through I did get really bored. Now I'm really looking forward to going back to Pokémon Legends Arceus and joining in with the endgame. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button down below and subscribe to This Week in Video Games. Or you can check me out on Twitter at TWIVG Podcast. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful, liking and sharing the video would really help me out. Otherwise, check out the other videos on the channel. Well, thanks again, and I'll see you soon.